Rugby World Rankings for the 4th of July, folks. What do you need to know? Who's up and who's down? What are the calculations going on? We'll go through these quickly and what are the possible permutations for this week's games. South Africa is still number one. There's no change there. And if you've looked at the numbers, 90.61, there's no change from last week. The win over Wales was essentially worth nothing on World Rankings terms because the gap between these two sides is large. I've done a video about World Rugby calculations before in terms of the rankings, but essentially once the gap between two sides gets too large, the bigger sides can't take any points off the smaller sides. So that is the case here. South Africa certainly winning the game allowed them to retain first. If they'd lost, they probably would be down because, they would have lost a full 2 points to the Welsh, so they would be in the high 80s. New Zealand are up over France, and you may ask yourself, hey, didn't France and New Zealand both win? Yes, they did. You may say, France was away from home. New Zealand were at home. How does that work? Well, essentially, the way the rankings are calculated, home advantage is worth 3 points on this log that they've got. So Japan, prior to the game against France, was on 78. Plus 3 puts them in the low 80s, right? Whereas Ireland, prior to their loss, were on 88. So plus 3 points for Japan. They are still ranked lower than Ireland. So New Zealand's win over Ireland, albeit at home, is still worth more by World Rankings terms than France's away win over Japan. So, New Zealand and France, their numbers have both actually gone up, but New Zealand's went up by enough to overtake the French. So, New Zealand up in the second. Ireland are steady as she goes in fourth, but they did lose points to New Zealand. They were on 88.22 prior, now 87.25. The Wallabies and England swap places. That kind of makes sense because their rankings were close and the Wallabies got a win. Likewise, the Pumas over Scotland saw the same thing happen with them, so they swapped places. As I mentioned, Wales didn't lose any points for their loss, and they didn't move any spots on the rankings. Same with Japan. They actually did lose points, but not any spots on the rankings. Fiji's gap to Tonga is too large. They didn't take any points over them because, remember, they were at home. So, there's no change with Fiji or Tonga. Italy is the big mover. I've got their jersey on for a reason. They beat Romania away from home like 45-13. They gave them a bit of a hiding, and they managed to pass Georgia and Samoa. Now, Georgia and Samoa both did play, but neither of their games were world ranking affected games because they didn't play sides who were on the world rankings. Georgia played an Argentinian 15 and Samoa played Australia A. So if the sides aren't on here, then not just my whiteboard, but you know what I mean, on the world rankings, then the games don't count. Like British and Irish Lions games don't count. Māori All Blacks games don't count. Argentinian 15, Australia A also doesn't count. So these guys didn't actually lose any points. They just got passed by the rampant Italy side. Spain's still there in 15th. I am feeling for Spain because their appeal for their Rugby World Cup disqualification was not even heard. The World Rugby basically said they don't have no new evidence, I think it was. So Spain is still on the outer. I do feel for Spain because they're a pretty small union in the scheme of things. It seems like they've been duped with the whole passport thing. I mean, obviously you've got to do your due diligence, but I do feel for them because... they seemingly are a pretty good developing rugby nation, and it would have been nice to see them in the World Cup, but that is what it is. And then Tonga, as I mentioned, didn't lose anything with their loss. Outside of my whiteboard, you got the US in 17th. They beat the French Barbars, but also that game doesn't count towards anything. Uruguay, Romania, Portugal, Canada, that's 18 through 21, and then Chile is in 23. I mentioned them because they'll be playing the US in a very important two-match series, Rugby World Cup qualifying, which starts this week. So super important for both those sides. That's going to be pretty massive. Permutations for this coming week. I don't think South Africa can lose number one unless they lose. I think they're pretty safe. But I do believe if New Zealand get 2 decent wins over Ireland, I'm talking 16 points, then they can pass South Africa come the end of the series. I could be wrong. But I'm pretty sure if New Zealand get a win over Ireland this week and it's 16 points, then they will go pretty close to South Africa. And as I said, South Africa can't get any points off Wales based on the gap between the sides being too large to exchange any points. Certainly if South Africa lost, they would plummet. France are probably going to drop if they lose, but will probably stay the same if they win. Ireland can probably make third if they win. These two, Wallabies and England, will swap if England win. Likewise, Scotland will take back their spot if they manage to beat Argentina away. And Wales could certainly go up a couple of spots, at least past Scotland, maybe past Argentina if they got a win in South Africa. But remember, you get more for winning by 16. It's kind of, there's two categories. It's 0 to 15 or 16 plus. So 16 plus away from home in South Africa seems kind of unlikely. But yeah, folks, there's a bunch of games on this weekend. As I mentioned, the Americans and the Chileans with their Rugby World Cup qualifying game, and then the continuation of the series which we have seen so far, plus Pacific Nations Cup. So it's all on. You guys let me know your thoughts. Who do you reckon is too high and too low? Italy starting to look a bit more respectable. I do think the rankings don't rank them that fairly because you only get points for winning, and they tend to lose most of their Six Nations games. So games against teams like Romania have actually allowed them to get some points for a change, which is good. But yeah, do you reckon New Zealand is the second best team in the world? Do you think South Africa still the top after that close challenge from the Welsh at the weekend, or are you expecting the Springboks to take it up a gear? You guys let me know your thoughts, and yes, I'll talk to you guys again. So, see you later.